yesterday, namely with the new objective of audience. So yesterday, early in the early AM, I was able to wake up intermittently from about 3 to 6 a.m., 5:50 more exactly, and put myself back to sleep by allowing whatever was coming to mind to center itself before me, give it a little bit of attention, and then usher it away before sleep came back. And the next thing came. Hi, Cloud S. You are indeed first. For whatever reason, this morning didn't go so well. It was back to the old, clustering crowd of thoughts, demanding attention. It's like having a crowd behind you and around you that are trying to look over your shoulder and trying to get at your attention and nudging and jostling. So I'll have to think about it a little bit to try and figure out why that was different. What was different about this morning versus yesterday, so that I can try to figure out how to replicate yesterday's success. So I'm going to go ahead and read a little bit from Going Alone. We'll begin with the introduction. How the journey began. Greetings from a man in the past with a sincere interest in your future. My name is Kurt Bell. I am 53 years old as I write these words, which is important and relevant as I do not think I could have written them at any other age. This book could not have been produced in my 40s or in any decade prior or to follow. This is a story to be told from my 50s and my one chance at describing the landscape and perspective of my life as seen from this particular vantage in time. This is my season of philosophy, which is my way of describing a period of life for recording ideas and stories which are reflective and cumulative of the best lessons so far lived and discovered. This book is an effort at sharing my experience and advice with those to come, and who might be inclined to sit and read a bit from an aging man who will be gone from life much sooner than he'd like. For, despite my various trials and challenges, I do dearly love being alive, and it saddens me to know I will soon die and pass away forever to nothing. Saying this is not a forecast or prognosis of imminent death, but instead is simply a sober reminder of the reality that life so often ends when we least expect, and sometimes just when we are at last ready to live. Let's move outside. It's a little bit loud in here with the music. That opening paragraph of the book is indicating who the book's directed towards. I basically wrote the book for people. Hey Vicesero, I think I'm reading that correctly. My eyes are a little bit blurry with my cataracts. I wrote the book for myself, basically, as all good interested individuals do. No, what I mean by that is I wrote that for the person I once was. Because when I was young, particularly in my teens, let's see if we can go outside. Sometimes there's noise out there too, but let's see. Oh, there's no noise out here, no music. That's better. That's good. Where's a good place to sit? It's very nice out here, someplace where there's a little light. Oh, this is nice. Let's sit here. This will do nicely. So, I wrote Going Alone for the man I used to be. I remember once when I was maybe 16 and a half or so, I went, "Hi Allie, I'm glad you like the sound of night." Yeah, it's lovely out this evening. It's better and safer to be outside anyway, even though the hotel is deserted, utterly empty. The bar's closed, everything, so it's pretty safe in that capacity. I remember one time I was driving from one part of LA to another, and someone just went to the website from in Texas. Welcome. And I was driving up by Wrightwood along the road that leads from the desert over to San Bernardino area. And I remember I pulled off to the side of the road and I parked the car and I went for a short hike up the hill into it was a wooded place. And I sat up there under a big pine tree against the tree. I had a long sit and think where my thoughts were nothing. I really felt lost at that point in my life. My parents were divorcing and going their separate ways, and I had no real community. My family had never been close to their families, so I had no really extended family to speak of. My brother was in the same boat as I. No really established institutions, no strong connections at school, no religion, of course, or anything like that. Although I did find religion shortly after that for a short while. And I remember just not really asking myself, what am I going to do? But just kind of, it was almost like a spaceman who finds himself stranded on an alien world, wakes up after the rocket has crash landed, and sitting there wondering what next. And that's how it felt at 16 and a half, looking out on life, knowing that the nest was over, and that what yawned ahead was life, whatever that was. And I quickly turned to religion, like I said, and became a Christian for a while, thinking that might be the thing. Maybe there's that community, and maybe that was the truth. And then, when I realized that was just basically some made up stories to comfort ourselves, so that to make that sense of the great indifference recede away and go back. And I gave up on that, and that left me with living a life on my own and making my way. Little did I know that I was then going to head out for 3 decades, basically, of banging my head against various trails and of life paths and the like. Fortunately, with a really good partner by my side, my wife, before I would eventually come to recognize that the very emptiness that seemed to be the thing I was trying to avoid was exactly the thing that everybody's trying to avoid. It's right out there above that building, that darkness out there. In fact, it's right here too. It's all around me. It's in that empty apartment, in an empty hotel. It's where you are and where I am, and it's with us when we're with others. It's what we only see when we go alone. If we're with others, we don't tend to see it. Even right now, I can barely sense it, but when I go to the desert, it becomes quite apparent. I'll continue reading just a little bit. I've resolved that I'm going to stay up to 11 o'clock tonight. Hello, Mino. I wrote this book with the young in mind, particularly the young who are just now waking into adulthood with questions about the life they found themselves living and the future which yawns ahead like a strange road to uncertainty. I was in this same position once, from about age 15 to 45, which was a long time of seemingly aimless drift. I'd like to help you shorten this period and make better use of the precious days I believe we each only get once. So, this is me trying to say that, I recognize where you are. Remember, the book is directed at younger people who might be in that same position, right? Looking out at the world thinking, now what? And I'm saying that it took me a long time of drifting from 15 to 40, 45 before I finally came to some ideas. Don't know if they're exactly right, but it seemed to work, the ideas in this book. And I want to help anybody to shorten that period. That is, those that are not predisposed to latch on to whatever comforting stories of contrived truth their culture might offer them. It took me a long time to break free of life's drift and settle into what I call a life of courage, joy, and independence. There is no gimmick here. I have no ulterior motive. I do not believe in an immortal soul, and therefore have no interest in saving mine or yours. However, I do sincerely want to be helpful, and I'd like to help you enjoy a better life and begin living this better life sooner. I will not ask you to believe anything I say, though I will explain the reasoning behind the arguments I propose. Let me start by sharing a little of my own background and some of the events which contributed to the challenges I faced and have mostly overcome. I call it a life of courage, joy, and independence, not out of self-flattery, but to point and illustrate the objectives, right? To be strong in facing our doubts, in living with our doubts, to have a joyous life. Why not? The alternative seems a much less savory and satisfying way to pass life. And independence. Of course, if we're going to strike out in the direction of what that isn't, we're going to have to be somewhat independent. And it was Emerson in Self-Reliance who talks about those who are a member of a sect or a tribe or a group who cannot speak anything but the sanctioned truth, right? Yeah. I arrived at young adulthood on my own. At age 15, my family was in the process of breaking up, and I was operating as an adolescent without much adult guidance or oversight. I was lucky, though, that a high school teacher at the time introduced me to a book titled Walden by the author Henry David Thoreau. This happened after our English class had been assigned to read The Call of the Wild by Jack London, and I'd expressed to the teacher how much I'd enjoyed the story, especially the narrative description of wilderness and the experience of life in the wild for both man and beast. I remember this same teacher taking time from her duties to walk me to the school library to locate and offer me a copy of Walden, which proved a pivotal event in my life as the book opened my eyes to a way of living and thinking which closely aligned to some inner interests I'd barely become aware were developing within me. Walden helped me to find the courage to venture out and alone onto my own road, to follow the beat of my own drummer, as Thoreau would describe, and to allow myself to live life in better accord with my own inclination and native aptitudes. It was the going alone bit which moved me most, as this provided an example and courage to strike out without companionship, aid, or comfort, and to take risks I might not have otherwise taken. I took Thoreau's example to heart and began my own solo meanderings and living in emulation of a lifestyle I thought well suited to who I was and the man I wanted to become. So in the midst of all of that, family breaking up, sense of disconnect, I was fortunate to have a caring teacher who was actually listening carefully when I told her how moved I was by The Call of the Wild, which of course is a nice fiction. Not a lot of, it's a good model for courage and interest, but not a lot of, not a lot of, what's the word? Thoreau, in his book, he describes how he demands of every author an accounting of themselves, because so that he can get a measure of the man or the woman who writes the book. And that's what I mean. In Walden, we get an accounting of Thoreau, his ideas and his life. You don't really get that in books like The Call of the Wild, although they may be in some ways autobiographical of Jack London's adventures. But you don't get Jack London's philosophy necessarily, although an argument maybe could be made that there is some of that in there. But you certainly get that with a book like Walden or Self-Reliance by Emerson. And even though I couldn't understand 50% of what was in Walden, I needed to buy a dictionary, a big red dictionary that I carried around with me to read and add to my vocabulary. And I wasn't trying to add to my vocabulary. I was just trying to understand what this man that was writing in the middle of the 19th century was saying, because I could tell through his eloquence and the little bits that I could understand, which seemed so profound, that there was something worth exploring there. Little did I know That would be the thing that would send me on the course to doing this and going out there and apprehending that and eventually writing this. My first attempts at Thoreau's lifestyle were a few solo hikes into the mountains surrounding our humble ranch near Lake Hughes, California. My family lived then in a very rural location, on 10 acres of land a few miles up Pine Canyon Road from the community of Lake Hughes, 60 miles north of Los Angeles. Our home was surrounded by chaparral wilderness, and going alone required very few footsteps from our front door. I spent much time then walking alone in the wild, escaping perhaps from the confusion of my teens, looking for something, not yet ready to discover what wasn't there in the wild to meet me. Wasn't, of course, in parentheses there. So after I started reading Walden, and I would read about Thoreau's rambles in the woods of Concord, I began looking around my own setting there in Lake Hughes, which was a chaparral wilderness, like I said in the book. Chaparral being this dense kind of a ground cover that's, maybe about head high or so, manzanita bushes and other types of things. It's very hard to get through. You almost have to crawl under it. But I was able to make my way up canyons and through gullies and to mountaintops, largely alone, which was the start of going alone. The remains of our home at Lake Hughes are still there, burned out after the fire which destroyed everything in 1983. The foundation and remaining bits of our lives at Moonshadow Ranch, the name of the place where we lived, are located on the north side of the road, down in the River Wash, just a quarter mile downstream from the remains of an abandoned highway rest area. Though our home site can be easily missed, the roadside rest is still evident by a dirt turnout and parking area on the north side of the road, amidst a cluster of tall pines. Although that home is really gone for good now. All that remains is anything that was inflammable. That's due to a big fire that ripped through earlier this year and burned everything up. So the only remnants you'll find of our family there are the foundation of our home, some ceramic items that have literally our imprint upon them, and maybe things like bicycle wheels that used to be mine. Our family bought Moonshadow, which included a simple one-bedroom home, for $15,000 in 1976. We bought it at the tail end of a family journey we called the Odyssey, when our traveling home was a converted Frito-Lay potato chip delivery truck, and we wandered the United States and Canada, searching for our collective selves. It would be a mistake to overlook the influence the Odyssey had on my life, which in many ways played as important a role in setting precedents for the importance of adventure as Thoreau's model of independence and self-reliance. So we found that place because, like I said, my folks were restless wanderers. Although I wonder if more of that had to do with their what was common at the time, right? This was in the 70s, when we were still influenced by the hippie era of finding oneself, of going to discover America and all that. So when my folks sold their house, my dad quit his job, and we hit the road, we were kind of doing a fashionable thing at the time. But I do think that they were both of my parents were lost souls. I think a lot of people from that generation were, especially that was a generation where raised in the 40s and the 50s, the cookie cutter path of marriage and kids and a 3-bedroom house with a 2-car garage and the like was the American dream, right? What other option was there? After the Odyssey, and after I gained the relative independence of a driver's license and a car, I began venturing further out on my own, even transforming my first car, a 1970 Camaro Rally Sport, into a miniature motorhome. I did this by removing all but the driver's seat and fashioning a bed, dresser, and storage cabinet into the places where the removed seats had been. When I was done, I had created a little muscle car motorhome, which was quite comfortable for my solo adventures, though honestly, I only used it a few times for this purpose. In fact, I found hitchhiking to be a more interesting and inexpensive way of getting around, and I was lucky to enjoy a short hitchhiking career before America lost its willingness to pick up strangers by the side of the road. So about that time when I got my first car, this was about the time, that was the same car that I mentioned when I stopped it along the road and went up and sat against the tree and thought about life. I tried to convert it into a motorhome for my purposes. Although I only used it, I can remember one time for that purpose, and that was a scary night that I spent up in the mountains higher than above Wrightwood, sleeping in my car, all terrified of the night. Such a life of courage, huh? And someone's back at the website from in Texas. Welcome. But anyway, even though I didn't use the car to that effect, it set the stage. It started things going, right? So I was going to start moving out on my own. Not moving out, but heading out on my own. And it's funny how I never, ever considered taking anybody with me then. In those early years, it was always to go alone. The idea of inviting someone along with me for the ride or to go hitchhiking, never. I began hitchhiking during the last 2 years of high school, initially just in California, though gradually I made my way halfway across the USA and up nearly into Canada. I enjoyed 3 or 4 long solo hitchhiking adventures during this time, when I literally went with the wind and slept out in the open with very little money, resources, or access to communication. These experiences, mini odysseys really, had a great influence in dulling my apprehension about going alone. Today I can thank those hitchhiking trips for development of the nerve and gumption I later need to simply walk away from the sane and secure, to venture alone into wild places without a map, a friend, or any certitude regarding finding my way back. This early life path I was on, of ever-extending adventure, of going further and deeper into strange places, always alone and seemingly without a safety net, would likely have led me to disaster and perhaps an early death, or a solitary life of social irrelevance, if it hadn't been for the institution of Chaffee Community College in Alta Loma, California, and a professor named David Bixler, as well as the small band of college friends with whom I shared a few years between high school and university. I was really lucky at that age that somehow, I don't quite remember how, I got it into my head that college was not an option. College was something that had to be done. So even though I felt this draw and desire to head out into the world to explore, I had to be back in time for the next semester, right? So that's why I kind of constrained my big adventures to the summers. Every summer I would head out, beginning in high school, head out hitchhiking and the like, and come back in time for the fall semester. Good thing that, because that led me to David Bixler, Chaffee College, people like my friend Eric eventually, and of course Chuck, Charles, and others, that had a way of grounding me and helping to what they really did was they gave me a more collegial, to use that term, community, right? A community of questioning thinkers, other people that were interested in higher education. Namely, and my friends in particular, were not in college to get a degree or further a career. We never talked about that stuff. We were there because we wanted to learn. And how lucky I was to have found that group. There we go. David Bixler, did I cover this? Yeah, there we go. David, sorry, losing my place. David Bixler introduced me to biology, as well as the more academic side of Thoreau, and the perspective of natural history and the methods and processes of science, and gave me and many others our first experiences of true wilderness. David Bixler awoke the grown-up empiricist in me and sent me forward on a life of reasoned discovery, with an eye and an interest in the frontiers of what we know and why we should care about what is true and not just what is comforting, traditional, sanctioned, or popular. One of the other great strokes of luck I had was that I didn't go straight to university. I went to community college. That's where I met Professor David Bixler and later Professor Delorier, men who cared more for teaching than being teachers necessarily. Really focused on their students, had led and thought interesting lives and wanted to share that with us. The classes that I were in with those men were probably no more than 10 or more than 15 people. I don't think, some of them might have been as few as 10, 15 people. And the classes would tend to get smaller. It would start off with a good chunk, and then over a couple of weeks, it would whittle down to a core of very interested people that were interested in the topics that the professors were talking about. So that was a great experience because I got to not only be with a community of peers, of the students that were interested in the education, but also to be led by two men in particular. And I also had some other good teachers too. There was one good teacher in speech communication, another one that was my English teacher that really helped out as well. Really a stroke of luck with that. If it hadn't been for those experiences, I don't think I would have been grounded. And I think I would have drifted away into life and fallen through the cracks in some way. Another important event at this time was discovering the public broadcasting TV series Cosmos, written and hosted by Carl Sagan. This program and its companion book won me over to the full paradigm of science and ignited a flame of interest in the natural world which burns as strong today as when I felt my first shudder of awe at the recognition of deep time and the processes by which our species has come to know ourselves and our small place in the universe. Cosmos really did move me, that and David Attenborough's series Life on Earth, but particularly the Cosmos, especially because we could look out at that and having some idea of what was out there. That kind of helped to create the ensemble theater of the universe and the backdrop of emptiness and disinterest that I just could not get away from and have never been able to get away from. In fact, which now form the core of my philosophy, my personal philosophy on life. The path I chose as a young man was risky, as going alone is a hazard at any age. Go too far and you may not get back. And even if you return, some essential part may be left behind in the place you found, a place in mind, a place alone, a place you may never successfully relate to others who have never been so far afield, without the comfort and guidance of maps, compass, companions, or gods. Going alone is key, and the people who visit deep solitude may appear eccentric or even mad to those who have never been, describing realities which don't seem very real, which may in fact only be real in the world they alone know. I sensed early this risk in going alone, and took measures to protect myself from going too far or too long. The most significant decision was my choice to settle and marry a young woman whom I love, respect, and admire, and who represents and lives a life very different from anything I had known. Likewise was I to her, and together we formed a symbiotic union of stability and adventure, which has served us well for over 30 years. Actually, I give myself too much credit. I had no idea that that's what I was doing. It was just dumb luck. Although there was a little inner voice inside me that was screaming at me all the while I was attempting to tear myself away from the safe and sane to head out into that world of isolation. It was screaming at me that was a mistake. And actually, so far, I've told this story before of how I actually, in my senior year of college, I didn't even hang around long enough to get the degree. I said, screw it, I'm not going to wait around for the ceremony. I bought a Jeep Wagoneer, headed out into the desert. And I told Yumiko, I don't know when I'm coming back, if ever. And Yumiko was making plans to go back to Japan. I wasn't breaking up with her. I just was going to go out I was just going to go away, and I wasn't planning to ever come back. And I did come back. Whew, thank gosh, man, near miss. Someday I've got to get myself back to that spot where I made that decision, which was a real turning point, so to speak, or a real fork in the road. Over time, I finished high school and went to college, got married, pursued a career, paid my taxes, and raised a family. I have managed to fulfill most of the expected roles and responsibilities of a social man of my time. On the other hand, I have also lived another, quite different life. A life in pursuit of the noble goals suggested by Thoreau, the example of the Odyssey, and the fond remembrance of the solitary adventures of my teenage years. Through this other life, I discovered and developed a separate side of myself, became the man whom Thoreau suggested I might be, and lived a life which has been a source of much satisfying personal fulfillment. I'm quite convinced that I would have next to nothing to say of any interest to anybody if it hadn't been for the fact that I chose to live the straight and narrow. I chose to settle down, to get married, to build a career, of course get educated, to have a child, to raise that child, to be dedicated to that family, to pay my taxes, to be honest, to not speed if I can remember, to park straight, all the things that contribute to building the better city as a group, right? All the while recognizing that there's this going alone bit and finding a way to pursue that and explore that in the midst of all these responsibilities. If I'd only done the going alone bit, it would be irrelevant to what I think is our purpose in life. If there is no purpose, if God isn't real, and there isn't anything out there that has some mandate for us, that there is really no 10 commandments that are our mandate and our model, then what the heck is life for? Well, life apparently has its own mandate, which is to stick around, right? To not die, to get our genes successfully into the next generation and raised to viability before we move on ourselves. That seems to be an evident purpose, quite clear to me. And participating in all the aforementioned activities of being a good citizen, a good father, mother, husband, brother, wife, sibling, all those things, is the good life. But if I hadn't gone alone, if I hadn't done this, then I wouldn't have that backdrop to compare it against, to realize, yeah, well, that seems to be the reality, but we don't have to give up. We don't mean you have to despair. You don't have to say, oh gosh, life is worth nothing. Why man it all, right? No, you can say, well, no, I'm gonna put on a nice shirt and comb my hair and get up in the morning. I'm gonna go to work despite the fact that it's really hard and it makes me nervous and I can't sleep in the wee hours because I worry about it. And I'm gonna do that anyway. I'm gonna live that good life, the good life. I wrote this book in appreciation of Thoreau's Walden and other similar books which have influenced me over the years, and which I have identified at the end of the book in the recommended reading section. I hope my book may prove helpful, particularly to the young, to someone like myself who finds themselves suddenly awake and conscious in a universe of wonder, and not sure just how to proceed or how to best spend their time. I will not tell anyone exactly what to do, though I will share objectives and principles which I have found helpful. Nor can I offer companionship, as the path I recommend isn't wide enough for two, and must always be found and followed alone. Again, I wrote this for folks like myself, who find themselves at a young age wondering just what the heck to do. I'm not offering a path necessarily, just sketching out the lines of the meandering trail that I took and what I found along the way. Now, a note about how this book was written, the characters within and the formatting approach. I wrote Going Alone between 2013 and 2017, between the tail end of my family's life in Japan and the start of our new life in the USA. The book was compiled from various online journals, which in turn were composed in bits and pieces via tweet-sized sentences and paragraphs, blurbs, which I pecked out on my mobile phone. I wrote nearly everything while on the move and adventuring, usually while walking and hiking, often far beyond the edge of internet connectivity. Each upload was hashtagged with a theme, which in turn became the major sections of the book. These themes are listed right here. Hashtag, My Muse is a Corpse, The Path of Wildness, Going Alone, The Good Life, The Stoic Life, and My God is a Little God. So the chapters, the sections, I call them sections in this book, are all related to the various themes that I had written, those particular hashtags. They all had a meaning at the time, and that helped me to collect them all together into chapters. The blurbs, one of the blurbs are the bits that I tapped out on the road, right? The prose parts are the stuff that I wrote to fill the filler between. It really is filler compared to the blurbs. The blurbs are rarely related, though sometimes there is a small story being told in the process of updates, which may become clear if the blurbs are read in their original order of upload. It is possible to find the original blurbs in their original order, along with any associated photos, as well as date and timestamps, by referencing my various Facebook pages. In particular, my Facebook page, Softypapa, which is the place where nearly all of my extemporaneous writing did first appear. The blurbs are included in this book in italics and collected together in sections under the heading Notes from My Muse. The section of this book titled The Path of Wildness was developed while my family, well, you know what, maybe I'll stop there tonight. That's a good place. It's far enough. I'll carry on with from elsewhere next time. Let's read the comments. I think I saw a couple fly past. A lot of comments. Wow. Okay. Vesheso? I'm saying it right? Wow, that sounds so much like what happened to me at 13. Parents divorced, no family, no other community, no other connections or prior religions. What an interesting similarity. How did it turn out for you? Where did you wind up in that? How old are you now? Mino says, what drifting is, it is when we are just going but with no destination in mind. The end goal might be good or bad for us, but there is always an end goal. Is there always an end goal? I don't think I had an end goal when I was leaning against that tree. I was wondering what the end goal might be. And then Haleka Food says, hi Kurt, hi there. I think people underestimate the courage it takes to seek joy. That's interesting. And then Will says, I can't quite, is that like a waving your hand? Or hi? It's a little emoji. Mino says, mentors do truly impact our lives a lot, indeed. Fesesho says, that must have been a really interesting thing to see, a complete cultural transition away from willingness to help hitchhikers. Yeah, that was. Yeah, those days are gone, I think. Jaden says, hey Kurt, hey Jaden, what time is it where you are at? It is, I don't know, I think it's about 10-ish, maybe, 10 p.m. Jaden Hennessy, had a lucky and great day. I had won $3,200 on a scratch ticket today. My first ever big win. Wow, drinks are on you. Congratulations. Kane says, really enjoying this. Thank you, you're very welcome. Thanks for stopping by. Jaden, love listening to you read, especially from your book. I'm so glad I get to catch you live often. I'm glad you did too. I can't believe I've been watching you for over 7 years now. Wow, that's a long time, Jaden. Thanks for the long support. Mino says, high risk, high reward. Yes. Jaden says, Kurt, you come off as a very intelligent man, more so than most. I can safely say, I got him fooled. Shh, don't tell anybody. Thanks everybody for your nice words and for joining me. Tomorrow, I have Thursday off, and Friday too. So I am definitely going to the desert. The temperature is perfect out there. It's going to be around 75 degrees or so, maybe 60 on Friday. So look for that. So a little madness from the desert. Haven't been out there for at least 6 months. And that's the thing about this new job. It takes all my time, but I like it that way. Tonight was a good stream. Well, thank you, Jaden. Agreed. All right. You all being well. And if I promised you a book and I haven't sent it yet, there's a reason for that. I've got a long list. I've got it's really long, but that's not the reason. It's because Emily keeps making new drawings and I keep holding off sending because I want to add the drawings. I've started trickling a few books out. So those of you who are getting the books, sorry, they don't have all the drawings in there, but I just feel bad waiting so long. But I will, you will, I've got you on my list and you'll get them, although it may take months for me to get them there to you. So a copy of Going Alone will come if you've asked for it. Anyway, be safe, but not too safe. Talk to y'all later. Bye, Darth Sepp.